Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest SAMPS webinar. We're here with Jen Wells from Qincade. I will formally introduce her in just a second. Give everyone a few seconds here to get settled in. Right, that looks like a quorum. So again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. By way of introduction, if you've come across the term the lead-nurture gap the last few months, chances are it originated with our speaker here. Jen is the co-founder and CEO of Qincade. They're the team behind the lead-nurture gap framework and the research that's been reframing how life science commercial teams think about what happens between a lead expressing interest and a buyer making a decision. Before founding Qincade, Jen led marketing for a global reagents and instruments manufacturer. And what she's sharing today is drawn directly from that experience. Real data, real results, and a methodology that she's now built into a system for that sector. Little more ado before we go to Jen. I am Adam. I'm on the board of SAMPS. Certainly encourage you to check out samps.org for what's coming up here in the future. We have an exciting webinar coming up on June 10th. That's going to be a great panel discussion. We are also starting to think about our US meeting next year and what's coming up from there. So with that said, Jen, I'm going to throw to you. The last thing for the audience, if you do want to interact or ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom. That will put you in the queue, and hopefully Jen can get to you at the end. But anyway, Jen, over to you.
Thanks, Adam. I want to start with a number, 800 days. That's the longest buyer journey we ever tracked inside a real life science business. From the moment someone first engaged with our content, a download, a webinar registration, an email open, to the moment a deal closed. 800 days. That's not a long sales cycle. That's 2 years and a bit of decisions being made while most organizations have no idea that it's happening. In the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through what we found when we started tracking that properly. The database we inherited, the decisions we made, the systems we built, and the results that followed. This isn't a framework presentation, it's a story with real numbers, real decisions, and real commercial outcomes. And by the end of it, I want you to be able to look at your own pipeline and see it differently. As Adam said, I'm Jen Wells. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Qincade. And before that, I led marketing for a global reagents and instruments manufacturer. What I'm sharing today isn't theoretical. It's what happened, and it changed how I think about pipeline management permanently. So, January 2021. I've just walked into a marketing department, large team, genuinely advanced for a life science company. And the first thing I look at is the database. Over 100,000 contacts, years of activity, events, campaigns, webinars, product launches, the whole lot, all of it sitting in the database. To any marketing person, that sounds like such a massive asset. But then I started looking at what we'd been doing with it. Over the previous 12 months, every single time something new came out of the lab, every reagent, every assay, every COVID response product, it went straight to the database. Every single time. Response rates were falling, unsubscribes climbing, card bounces accumulating. The database wasn't an asset, it was a liability. And it had got that way through good intentions and a fast-moving market. The team had been doing exactly what the situation seemed to demand. And this is a pattern that I see again and again across life science marketing teams. The database grows because of a product launch or a conference or a COVID or some pandemic-driven content burst. And nobody pauses to ask whether the people in it are still the right people, still in the right place in their thinking, still receptive to what's being sent. Volume becomes the default, and slowly, quietly, the relationship erodes. The uncomfortable truth is that we hadn't been nurturing that database, we'd been exhausting it. So here's the full context. The business was pivoting. C-suite had decided that the commercial focus needed to shift towards the molecular diagnostics, so MDX. It was something that came out of the COVID pandemic, and we'd been really successful doing it. We had the manufacturing infrastructure to do it, global supply chain capabilities that had actually held up during COVID when lots of competitors were running short. So the market opportunity was real. The problem was that the database reflected the old business, not the new direction. Agrigenomics contacts were receiving MDX content. MDX prospects barely existed in the system. And on top of that, the mailing strategy had been volume driven rather than relationship driven. So the challenge was penetrate a new sector, build engagement with a new audience, demonstrate MDX credibility, and do all of that starting from a database that is tuned out. That's the situation I walked into. Now, the specific sector pivot is particular to the story, but the underlying tension, that database you have versus the market you're trying to reach, is something I've heard from so many different life science marketing leaders I've spoken to. You've built something in one direction, and now the business needs you to go into another. The contacts in your CRM don't reflect the conversations you need to be having. And the temptation in that situation is to start again. Buy a new list, run a new campaign, generate new leads from scratch. What I'd argue before you do any of that is you need to understand what you already have and why it stopped working. I suspect that some of what I've just described sounds familiar. Maybe not the sector pivot and things, but the sense that the database that you have doesn't quite reflect the market that you're trying to reach. And that the approach that got you this far isn't going to be the one that's going to get you to that next stage. When engagement rates fall, the instinct for any marketer is to optimize around the edges. Test a different subject line, try a different send time, change the CTA, do your A/B testing. All of it feels really productive. Challenge is it's not addressing the underlying problem. So the decision I made was to stop all mailings completely for a month, maybe 2 months, cold. Now, the internal reaction to that is exactly what you'd expect. The market was moving and so fast at that time. Leadership is watching the pipeline. Going quiet feels like exactly the wrong move. But the pause wasn't idle. While we weren't sending, we were auditing. We were going through the database and asking all the hard questions about every single segment in it. Not, is this contact valid? But is this contact relevant? Do they represent the kind of buyer we're trying to reach? What have they actually responded to? And what does their behavior tell us about where they are in their thinking? All of you will know audit work is hugely unglamorous. It's just painful. It doesn't generate leads. It doesn't produce a campaign, but it's the foundation for everything that came after. You can't build a precise, relevant system on top of an imprecise, irrelevant data set. Stopping wasn't the strategy, it was the precondition for the strategy. You can't build a relationship-led approach on top of an exhausted database. You have to let it recover first. Sometimes the most strategic thing a marketer can do is stop. That's a really hard thing to hold the line on. But in this case, I stand by that call. I genuinely believe it was the right call. We're going to do a poll quickly, if we can, Adam. I want to ask you something before we go any further, because I want to know what it is we're exactly dealing with in the room. I'm not sure, Adam, if we're going to get the results showing at some point. Okay. So the vast majority, or not the vast majority, but the majorities, we haven't have a rough idea, but haven't done a full audit. So we're not alone in this then. Cool. Let's keep going. So what we did once we'd stopped sending, we started understanding who we actually had in the database. Not just names and email addresses, but sector. Were these agrogenomics leads, MDX leads, or leads for our nucleic acid chemistry business? What was the buyer journey stage? Were they in their thinking, early in their thinking, or getting close to a decision? What was their role and seniority? Were we talking to a principal investigator, a lab manager, someone in procurement? And their engagement signal. Had they been actively engaging with our content, or had they gone cold? Let me talk you through why each of those layers actually matter in practice. Sector tells you what the problem the person is trying to solve. An agrigenomics researcher, for instance, and an MDX lab director, they're both scientists, but they're evaluating completely different things. The same content that resonates with one will be irrelevant to the other. Getting sector wrong means your segmentation collapses before it's even started. The buyer journey stage tells you how far along they are in their thinking. Someone in early awareness needs to understand that a problem exists and that your category of solution actually addresses it. Someone in active evaluation already knows that. What they need is comparative evidence and validation. Send awareness content to an evaluator and you look like you don't understand where they are. Send evaluation content to someone who isn't there yet and you're going to lose them. Role and seniority tells you what decision-making authority looks like. A principal investigator cares about scientific rigor and whether a method actually works. A procurement manager cares about supplier reliability and commercial terms. A lab manager cares about workflow integration and the ease of adoption. One lead form, one content sequence sent to all three missed conversations. An engagement signal tells you the temperature. Cold contacts need reactivation content before they receive anything more demanding. Warm contacts are ready for more specific information. Active contacts are actually signaling intent, and those are the ones the scoring model should be pushing towards the handover threshold. So segmentation at this level means that when you start sending again, you're not sending the same thing to 100,000 people. You're having specific conversations with specific people based on what they've told you that they're interested about. And this note here on the slide about most organizations not capturing this consistently, That's not a criticism, that's an observation. Most CRMs are set up to capture contact information, not buyer intelligence. The question is, what do you do to start building that intelligence from the next interaction forward? There are three things that feed into the segmentation model. First, data enrichment, filling the gaps in contact records. So, sector, seniority, company size. So, you know who you're actually talking to before you send anything at all. Second, ICP fit check, scoring contacts against your ideal customer profile before they enter a nurture track. So, the right people are receiving the right sequence. And third, lead source tagging, recording where a lead came from so content relevance and scoring thresholds can be calibrated from the very first interaction. The third one is worth pausing on for a moment because it's the one that gets skipped most often. If someone, say, comes in through a technical webinar and on CRISPR applications, that tells you something very specific about where they are in their thinking and what they're likely to need next. If someone comes in through a generic trade show badge scan, that tells you almost nothing. And you need a different approach entirely to understand what they're actually evaluating. So lead source tagging means you're not treating both of these people identically in the first 30 days of your interaction. And that distinction, made at the point of entry, shapes everything that follows. A lot of organizations skip this step, which is why their nurture sequences end up talking to the wrong people in the wrong way at the wrong time. Now, I want to talk to you about content strategy that came out of this segmentation work because it was built on one principle that changed everything. Scientists have been trained to evaluate evidence. They apply the same skepticism to marketing content that they apply to a paper they're peer reviewing. The moment something sounds promotional, they switch off. It was never about selling our products. It's not what we went for. It was about giving scientists something they could look at and think, oh my God, that is so cool. I want that result. I want to be part of that. So the campaign we built was entirely customer story led. Every customer who'd done something genuinely impressive during the pandemic, running diagnostics at scale, developing novel assay workflows, contributing to vaccine development, we went to them and asked them to tell their story. Now, I know what you're going to say. Not many customers want to tell their story, but you just have to be persistent, and sooner or later you will find some. The format was editorial. The product barely appeared until the very end. Story first, education through that story, product almost incidentally at the close. Most life science companies I see do that in exactly the wrong order. The product leads, the capabilities lead, the technical specifications lead, and the customer story, if there is one, appears at the end as a case study in a resource library that nobody finds organically. The problem is that that scientific buyer encountering your content for the first time doesn't yet have a reason to trust your claims. They haven't worked with you. They haven't seen your product perform. So when you lead with the product, you're asking them to take your word for something they have no evidence for yet. And scientists don't do that. But if you lead with what a peer achieved, a researcher at a comparable institution working on a comparable problem, using your product as part of their workflow, the dynamic shifts entirely. Now you're not making a claim, you're presenting evidence. And evidence is exactly what a scientific buyer is trained to evaluate. The likes of Thermo Fisher and Illumina have been doing this for years. They build credibility by letting the science community speak for itself. Peer validation is that mechanism. You're not making a claim, you're showing what someone like your buyer already achieved. That's the content model that changes the commercial conversation. Not here's our product, but here's what a scientist like you did with it, and here's the result that they got. I want to talk about something that most marketing teams skip because it requires a really difficult internal conversation. Before a single lead went to the commercial team under the new model, I sat down with every sector lead and asked one question. What does a good lead actually look like to you? Not what marketing assumed, what sales actually needed to see before they'd pick up the phone. Those are often very different things, and that gap between them is where leads die. And what those conversations revealed was so instructive. Sales weren't looking for volume. They weren't looking for the highest number of leads in their inbox. They were looking for specificity. They wanted to know which organization the contact was from, what they'd actually engaged with, whether they'd shown any signal that they were in active evaluation cycle, not just general interest. The leads that sales were ignoring weren't being ignored out of laziness. They were being ignored because they didn't contain enough information to warrant a response. One of the things that we picked up pretty early was that a lot of the commercial team were ignoring any leads that came with a personal email address, so a Gmail address or a Hotmail address or whatever it is. Once we were able to explain the valid reason why those leads had that email address, things shifted completely. So, from the commercial team's perspective, picking up the phone on a lead that's only opened one email is a waste of their time. From marketing's perspective, that contact might be 2 more touch points away from being ready. The problem was that no one had agreed what ready meant. So that's what the conversation produced, a shared definition of MQL, SQL. What signals needed to be present before a lead moves to the inside sales layer? What signals need to be present before inside sales passes it to commercial? And what happens to leads that don't meet those thresholds? Because the answer to that isn't discard them. The answer is put them back into the nurture track and keep the relationship warm. The output of those conversations was a set of agreed KPIs, how quickly a lead was actioned once it arrived, how many outreach attempts before it's recycled, what engagement signals constitute readiness to contact. We added this inside sales layer as a buffer, not for every segment, but for the segments that felt it was valuable. Leads that were showing interest but hadn't yet hit the scoring threshold didn't just sit in the database. They went to inside sales for validation first. By the time a lead reached commercial, it had already been assessed as worth pursuing. Sales don't want to be told how to define a good lead. That conversation is super uncomfortable. But once you've had it, the workflow then does the arguing for you. So, what did the nurture system actually look like? It was tiered by engagement level, not a single sequence sent to everyone. Cold contacts received a newsletter, light touch, low commitment, designed to maintain presence without demanding attention. Warm contacts, those showing early signs of interest, they received sector-specific content. So it might be case studies or editorial pieces or technical explainers relevant to what they told us they cared about. And active contacts, those showing strong engagement signals, received deeper material, content designed to help them with the actual decision they were moving towards. Decision support information, peer validation, any evidence that we had. And the analysis was continuous. Every few weeks, we were looking at the data and asking the same questions. What's the click to open rate on the newsletter going to cold contacts? If it's dropping, the subject matter isn't resonating. And we need to adjust either the content or the audience it's going to. What are the warm contacts clicking on? That tells you the topics that are generating the most active interest and informs what you then produce next. We were also looking at the handover data. When a lead crossed the threshold and went to inside sales, what happened next? Did inside sales engage with it? And if not, why? Was the lead genuinely not ready? Or had the scoring threshold been set too conservatively? That feedback loop between inside sales behavior, commercial behavior, and the scoring model was one of the most valuable sources of optimization data we had. Because the reality is the model is only as good as the human behavior it's designed to trigger. If inside sales consistently isn't picking up leads that marketing considers ready, the answer isn't just to tell inside sales to work harder. The answer is to understand what's missing from those leads and to adjust the model accordingly. The system was never, ever just set and left. It was analyzed continuously. Click to open rates, editorial engagement, behavioral signals, all of those taken and fed back in and adjusted to the thresholds over time. That's what separates a nurture system from a nurture sequence. A sequence ends. A system adapts. Think about the last lead your sales team said wasn't good enough to follow up. Do you even know what happened to that lead after the conversation? The reality is, most of us don't know. And that's not a failure of the individual, it's a failure of the infrastructure. Because if there is no system to catch that lead and that lead and to make sure that it keeps moving, it just sits there or it leaves. Before all of this work, pipeline was measured from the point at which sales picked up the lead. What changed was tracking it back further to that very, very first interaction. The first email open, the first content download, the first webinar registration, whatever it was, that's when we started tracking from. So when that person first entered into our ecosystem, we tracked. And when you do that, the timeline looks completely different. The average sales cycle across this business was 9 to 24 months. Not from the point of sales engagement, from the first touch. In a significant number of cases, it was over 800 days. And within that journey, some contacts had up to 42 meaningful touch points before they converted. Think about what 42 touch points actually means for a commercial organization. 42 moments where a piece of content landed in front of someone who was, at various points, thinking about the problem that your product solves. 42 opportunities to be the most useful, the most credible, the most present voice in that person's evaluation process. And without a nurture system, most of those 42 moments simply don't happen. The contact gets the product email or the conference follow-up and then nothing. Until sales makes a cold call months later and wonders why there's no traction. 42 opportunities to shape how that person was thinking about the decision they were trying to make. 42 chances to be useful, to be credible, to be present. The question is, how many of those opportunities was the organization actually using? Look at what's on this slide. The buyer found us, they engaged with something, they entered the ecosystem, they were interested. And then this better part of 2 years, they moved through an evaluation process, reading papers, talking to colleagues, attending conferences, assessing competing solutions, building internal consensus, managing budget cycles. And for most of that time, for most organizations, marketing was absent. The nurture sequence had ended. Sales hadn't yet asked to engage. That entire evaluation period, where the buyer is doing the most thinking, belongs to nobody. When a deal comes in after that kind of silence, it looks like late stage conversion. Nobody knows it was an 800-day relationship because no one was tracking it from the start. And here's the implication that doesn't get talked about enough. If a buyer spent 800 days evaluating, and during that period you were absent, then the 800-day conversation was happening with someone else. Your competitors, industry publications, peer networks, conference speakers, the scientific literature, all of those things influencing how that buyer thought about the decision. You just weren't part of that conversation, which means that when you finally re-enter the picture, when sales makes contact or when the lead comes back inbound, you're starting from behind. The buyer has already been shaped by other influences, and the degree to which you can change their thinking at that stage is significantly lower than it would have been 12 months earlier. There's a name for what you're looking at: the lead nurture gap. That period between initial engagement and purchase decision where most organizations have no systematic way of maintaining influence. It isn't a content problem. It's not a leads problem. It's a structural problem. The absence of infrastructure to maintain influence across a buying journey that can last 2 years or more. It sits in a really awkward place organizationally. Marketing considers its job done. It's sent out the various content. It's done their email. It's done the webinar. It's arranged the conference, whatever it is. Sales isn't yet involved. So that mid-funnel, the period where the buyer is constantly doing the most thinking, it's effectively unmanaged. This is Mark Forstner, former VP and GM of Gyrus Protein Technologies. He didn't come to me as a prospect. He invited me to participate in a commercial Kaizen with his team because of my experience in life science pipeline strategy. I share that because the lead nurture gap isn't something that we invented at Qincade. All we did is name it. But it is something that people running across commercial organizations in the sector recognize immediately when it's named. This is a model we've developed showing 4 levels of lead nurture maturity, how different organizations perform during that evaluation period. Level 1 at the bottom, so this red dotted line, is lead generation only. You can see what happens. There's a strong brand presence, a strong presence during the buyer interest, and then almost complete absence during the evaluation period. The brand influence drops to near zero precisely when the buyer is doing most thinking. Level 2, this one here, is campaign nurturing. Shows some activity during the evaluation period, but it's time limited. A post-event sequence, a product launch campaign, a 3 email follow-up. The contact gets a burst of energy and then goes quiet again. It's better than nothing, but it doesn't match the length of the buyer journey. Level 3, this one here, is the guided evaluation. This is where organizations start to maintain meaningful presence throughout the evaluation arc. They're producing content that matches buyer journey stage. They have some scoring in place, and they're making decisions about when to move leads towards a commercial conversation rather than just waiting for inbound signals. Level 4, this one here at the top, is evaluation influence. That maintains high brand influence throughout the entire arc. That's what sustained, structured nurture looks like in practice. Most organizations that I've come across sit here at level 1 or 2. That's not a criticism, it's just where the sect is. The organizations that close the gap don't do it overnight. They start with one layer and they build. So once the tracking was in place, we chose to go with first touch attribution, so full journey visibility. It became possible to answer the question that most marketing teams can't answer. How much of what sales closed did marketing actually originate? The answer in this case was more than £17 million in first touch revenue that could be demonstrably linked back to a marketing generated initial interaction. First touch attribution, tracked from the very first interaction across the entire buyer journey. Revenue that without the infrastructure would have been attributed to nothing. It would have looked like sales converted it, which technically they did, but marketing opened the door, often years before. This is how you win the attribution argument, not by asserting that marketing matters, but by building the data from the start that proves it. And what it meant for the relationship between marketing and the business was significant. Because once you can demonstrate that a specific piece of marketing activity, an editorial piece, a webinar, a targeted content campaign, originated a lead that closed 2 years later for a substantial value, the conversation isn't about marketing investment. That changes entirely. You're no longer defending a budget, you're presenting a return. Everything that worked in that business came back to 4 things. And those 4 things became the architecture of Qincade's lead nurturing and progression system because we proved that they worked and we knew that they were replicable. Layer 1, database health and segmentation. Know who you're talking to before you send anything. This is the foundation, and it's the step that most organizations skip because it really isn't glamorous. Layer 2, content-led nurturing by segment. The content has to match where the person is in their thinking, not where your product launch calendar says that they should be. Layer 3 is behavioral-led scoring. The score isn't set by a marketer's instinct. It's driven by what the contact actually does. Their behavior tells you when they're ready. You just have to be listening. And layer 4 is sales alignment and handover. Not a conversation, a workflow. Agreed criteria, agreed process, agreed KPIs, built in advance, not negotiated deal by deal. The reason that I call this a system rather than a framework or checklist is that these 4 layers are interdependent. You can't make layer 2 work without layer 1. Because if you don't know who you're talking to, you can't create content that's relevant to them. You can't make layer 3 work without layer 2, because lead scoring depends on behavioral signals. And those signals only mean something if the content that generated them was targeted appropriately. And you can't make layer 4 work without layer 3, because the handover threshold is only credible if the score it based on reflects genuine intent. Start anywhere, but know that what you build needs to connect the layers on either side of it. And the investment compounds over time because the data that you collect in year one makes the scoring smarter in year two, which makes the content relevant in year three. We're going to run another poll right now, so have a look at where we think your organization sits right now. We see four options here. We generate leads, but have minimal structured nurturing after handover. We have nurture sequences, but they're time limited, not behavior triggered. We have active lead scoring, but sales alignment is inconsistent. And we have a lead progression system in place. It's working well. So where are you currently sitting? Okay, so we're sort of looking at the majority sitting at one or two. So we generate leads but have minimal structured handover. And we have nurture sequences, but they're time limited, not behavior triggered. So whatever level you find yourself at, that's your starting point. The organizations that close the lead nurture gap, they don't do it overnight. They start with one layer and they build. If you want a more detailed picture of exactly where your progression infrastructure is breaking down, the Lead Nurture Health Scorecard takes us about 10 steps further. There's a QR code at the end, and I'll share the link and then you can see. It's free, it takes 5 minutes, and it's worth doing before any other conversation. So, 5 things that this story owns the right to say, every single one of them. 1, stopping is a strategy. When engagement rates fall, the instinct is to do more. But sometimes the most strategic move is to pause, audit what you have, and rebuild with intention. The database that gets stopped often recovers into something far more powerful than the one that kept broadcasting. 2, scientists don't buy from vendors, they buy from peers. So scientists buy from scientists. Content that leads with what a scientist like them achieved will outperform product-led content every single time with technically trained audience. The product belongs at the end of the story, not at the beginning. 3, sales alignment is a workflow. It's not a conversation. Getting sales to respond to your leads isn't about convincing them that your leads are good. It's about building a system where the leads that reach them already meet the criteria that they've asked for anyway. Build the workflow. Let it do the arguing for you. 4, your pipeline is longer than you think. If your average buyer takes 9 to 24 months to convert, and in some cases, like the ones I've just exhibited, over 800 days, your nurture infrastructure has to match that timeline. A 3-mail email sequence is not going to do it. 5, attribution is an argument that you can win. If you build the data from the start, track from the very first interaction, maintain visibility across the journey. When the deal closes, you'll know exactly how long ago marketing opened that door. And that changes the board conversation completely. Before I open up for questions, there are 2 things to close with. First, as I mentioned, the Lead Nurture Health Scorecard. If you want to understand exactly where your pipeline progression is breaking down, this is where you can start. It maps your current infrastructure based on how you've answered the questions and provides you with customized results with actionable recommendations. It's completely free and takes 5 minutes. QR code is here for you to scan, and it'll take you straight to the lead scorecard page. Secondly, if what the scorecard shows you warrants a deeper conversation, or if you'd rather just talk it through directly, we offer a free 30-minute lead nurture readiness review. We run these in cohorts of 8 per month, so availability is limited. There's no pitch, there's no obligation. We work through your current setup and tell you honestly where you stand. Scorecard is the right starting point if you want clarity first. And if what it shows warrants a conversation, that's what the readiness review is for. So I'll finish with, what do you think is sitting in your pipeline right now that you haven't looked at in 6 months? Think about that. Questions? Any questions? I'm happy to answer them now.
Well, Jen, that was awesome. Fortunately, we do have some solid questions here from the audience. As a reminder, feel free to use the Q&A feature down below. If we don't get to you live here in the next 12 or so minutes, we'll answer via email. So Jen, first, on behavioral lead scoring, which non-obvious triggers, the obvious being your report download at your company, do you consider? For example, a prospect post on LinkedIn that may pertain to your business.
What was the last bit? A prospect post on LinkedIn that what?
May pertain to your business.
So from a behavioral thing, it really does depend what your content is, what content you actually have. I think it's a discussion that you need to have as a team. So if you're looking at an omni-channel strategy and you've got a lot of things going on in different channels, work out where the content sits in your funnel, and then you can look at behavioral scoring based on what's actually happening, what content they're interacting with. Now, if there is someone engaging on LinkedIn, very often I would advocate that that's something that possibly either your social media manager should pick up if you've got one, or someone in an inside sales role. If they're saying something about your thing that actually seems to be a trigger to you, that they seem to be engaged with your business, pick it up, have that conversation. No conversation is wasted.
All right. What did you use to start tracking all the touch points along a customer journey, and where did you store and analyze it?
So we were running with, we had sales, Salesforce, and we had Pardot. So Marketing Cloud and Sales Cloud effectively. Every single time we used anything, so if we used third-party media, very often the third-party media company would send us an Excel spreadsheet. That Excel spreadsheet was uploaded into the system and it kept a track of where that lead actually came from. All of that information was stored in Pardot, so in Marketing Cloud, and some of that information was then shoved across into Sales Cloud. The bits that were relevant, then the salesperson could actually engage with it and they could see where the contacts came from, what they were engaging with. So we knew. So everything was tracked from the very first outset. We knew if we were doing something like an email thing, we would add them to a particular campaign. So we had designed our Marketing Cloud and Sales Cloud to keep track of every single campaign we were running. We used UTM tracking across the board. So for every single thing, we had UTM tracking. So we knew that if someone came in through, for instance, some social media post, or if they were responding to a webinar link that was promoted via an email or via some other channel, we knew where that lead was coming from. So every single source of every lead that entered our database, and I use the term lead really loosely, they weren't leads to us, they were prospects. And they only became leads after a certain amount of interaction. And when that score gained to a certain point, then we classify them as marketing qualified leads. Up until that point, they were prospects, but everything was stored in either Pardot, so Marketing Cloud, or Salesforce, or both often.
Typically, our sales team say they don't want marketing comms going to leads, but this means those leads may go from hot to tepid over long time periods. What would you suggest to get them on board?
I honestly think that this is one of the most valuable things that you can do even if it's like that commercial Kaizen or some kind of workshop with sales, as long as you keep the communications distinct from each other and you're not treading on sales toes and sales is not treading on marketing's toes, there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't have conversations going. So if you're wanting to tell a warm lead, for instance, about a new webinar that you've got coming up, or the fact that you've launched a new product, I think you should actually let sales know that that's what you want to tell them. In that sales conversation that they're having, sales might not think about letting them know about this new reagent or new oligo that you've launched or whatever it is. And all of a sudden, they then get an email from you saying, hey guys, just to let you know, we've launched this new reagent. And when the sales next have the conversation with that potential lead, they can go, oh gosh, we just received an email that said that you've launched this new reagent. Hey, can we have a discussion about that? So you're not doing the same job. You're maintaining that conversation. And in the same way that you can have multiple friends in the same friend group, and all of them can be talking to you, sometimes about the same subject, sometimes about different subjects. You're not competing. You should realistically just be enhancing the level, the volume in that conversation to the point that you are keeping that lead engaged.
So, what advice do you have to accomplish this complex structure for small to medium-sized startups that have a single marketing person and limited salespeople and often no inside salespeople?
I don't think inside sales is necessary. It's not a necessary level. We were very lucky. We were a large organization, and so we had an inside sales team. There are third-party providers that you can use to do that work that you obviously pay for, but again, it depends on your marketing budget and whether you think that's valid. The most important thing, and I really do stress this, one of the most important things is to have that conversation between marketing and sales to build that alignment. To know that if you have, say, for instance, all you're using is HubSpot and everyone's working from HubSpot, you still have all the capability you need within HubSpot to do this tracking. You can do that kind of thing. You don't have to be hugely sophisticated. You don't have to build out, loads and loads and loads of content. Think through one, who your ICPs are, get that really, really clear. Second thing to do, look at a content audit. So have a look at what content you have and make sure that it maps against the different stages of the funnel. Don't have lots of top of the funnel content that might be that really sort of the blogs or whatever. And then you go straight to the bottom of the funnel, which is all the technical specification things, but you have nothing in the middle. You want to build a full funnel of content that touches all those different things that the buyer journey will be doing. And then it's easy to build the automated sequences based on various touch points that that person has. Have they looked at that ROI, calculator that you have? You know that they're pretty close to making a decision. So send them out relevant information that then tells them, hey, guys, if you're evaluating, these are the things that you need to do. So it does take time. You need to kind of make sure that your database is in the right place. Really good argument. In my case, I would say sort your database out. If it's not in a good condition, even if it means you ask for additional budget to get that database audited and sorted, start there, because otherwise you're building from a really bad foundation. Get that sorted, do your content audit, and then you can build out your nurture structure based on various touch points. Not easy, I admit, but it is doable.
All right, we have time for one more question here. So Jen, the 17 million pound first touch attribution figure is striking, but attribution is something we struggle to agree on internally, let alone prove. How did you get commercial leadership to accept your methodology, and what did you have to build technically to make it work?
We were tracking two different things. So marketing was tracking the first touch attribution, and that's when we did any presentations to the board, that's what we were presenting because we knew we could justify that figure. Sales was presenting their own pipeline. They had their own pipeline running that was looking at deals that they were actually negotiating, and we very often didn't have sight of those deals. What we knew is, for instance, because we'd started tracking the interactions that people had, their first touch point, we could go, that person came into our database from a webinar we delivered 4 years ago. That was the first time that we ever brought that contact into our database. You track what's happening over that period of time, all the various touch points, and then boom, a lead is closed. And again, it's not always 100% accurate. Just please bear that in mind because very often you have groups of people from the same company and you'll have one company doing the purchase, not necessarily the individual. But you can more or less track what is going on, who's moving through the pipeline, and you can then say, okay, fine, here we go. And the rationale that we used to talk to sales about it was we're bringing in all of these leads on a monthly basis. And we were tracking really pretty highly. I mean, we would bring in roughly between 1,000, sometimes up to 2 or 3,000 leads a month, new prospects a month. So we were doing a high turnover of prospects. We needed to justify that the money that we were spending on specific things was actually going somewhere. So our argument to sales was, you've had this conversation and there's no denying you've taken that person over the finish line. Great. Thank you so much for doing that. However, if we hadn't brought that person in 4 years ago, 6 months ago, 10 months ago, whatever, you wouldn't be having that conversation now. And so if we can track what we're doing and where our value lies, you can continue tracking your pipeline and we can measure both of these. But what it does show is to the C-suite, it shows the value that marketing actually brings to the commercial conversation.
Standing. Well, Jen, that was fantastic. Great content, great answers. There's a handful of questions we haven't gotten to live. We'll strive to answer those via email. As a reminder, everyone here should get a YouTube link within a couple of days if you'd like to share this or watch again. In the meantime, check out samps.org for everything we have going. But again, thank you so much. Thank you, Jen, and thank you for everyone who showed up today.
Thanks so much, Adam. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks everyone for attending. Bye.